Mega Man 2 on the Game Boy was not good. Since my video on that game, I've learned it was made in 3 months, and I mean, what was Capcom expecting? Unfortunately, they decided it was the developers' fault the game turned out the way it did, and they passed the third Game Boy game back over to Minakuchi Engineering. Thankfully, I thought their first game, Dr. Wily's Revenge, was a pretty decent showing. Once I heard they'd come back, my hopes for this third game were relatively high. So how did it turn out? Did their experience mean the second game would be a huge improvement? It's time to find out. Even though Game Boy 2 didn't exactly turn out well, there were a few great ideas. Probably the best part was its first Wily stage, where 4 portals open up that each take you to a mini-stage based on Mega Man 3. That was such a cool idea, but the limited time frame meant that section ended up being totally unfinished. It seems like the developers at Minakuchi agreed with me though, and decided to expand it into a brand new structure for the series. You start out with 4 stages based on Mega Man 3, then a middle stage where you infiltrate Wily's castle and find a portal to 4 more complete stages based on Mega Man 4. I love that these Game Boy games play around with your expectations, inventing something that fans of the series like me will find really cool. So what about the game itself? Well, at this point it plays almost exactly as you'd expect. You have the slide from 3 and the charge shot from 4, and both work great. Mega Man still has a bit of the loose air control from Dr. Wily's Revenge, but again, once you get used to it, it isn't all that bad. It does feel a bit smoother, and I can't really explain exactly how, but I can definitely feel an improvement. A pretty big change from Dr. Wily's Revenge that I don't love is that they don't mix multiple stage themes together anymore. Now this change is completely understandable. They were able to mix Elecman and Airman before because for all they knew, Dr. Wily's Revenge was going to be the only game they made. Now that this is Mega Man 3 on the Game Boy, they decided to play the level themes a bit more straight. This is a bit unfortunate, but what fixes it for me is that in some of the stages they get pretty creative with both the level design and the theming. For example, Snake Man has this new background with swaying palm trees, Skullman replaces the orange sky at the end with a cave section, etc. Gemini Man totally revamps the first section to be far more interesting than just walking on a straight line with annoying enemies for a full minute. Most of these changes I'm completely down for, and they definitely spice up what would be an otherwise exceedingly basic Mega Man game. The rest of the aesthetics are pretty good for the Game Boy, with a nice stage select animation and decent remakes of the original music. There's also a great new piece of music they made for completing a stage and showing off the new weapon. Although I do have one thing here to complain about. Why did they use the Mega Man 4 stage select music instead of 3's? I mean, 4's is good, but the one from 3 is just legendary. In terms of how the stages play out, the boss design is nothing special. Mega Man 3 bosses play out basically the way you'd expect, just with a smaller arena and the charge shot which improves the experience of fighting them like it does in 4. Speaking of, the bosses from 4 are basically exactly the same as they were originally, except they just get shredded to pieces by their weaknesses. That is a bit unfortunate since those bosses did have some potential, but 4 just distracted from its solid ideas for the bosses with a bunch of small but very noticeable issues. This time around, I guess I prefer those bosses just because I don't actively dislike them, but they could have been great with some better balancing. And the stages themselves are, well, the first word that comes to mind is difficult. Yeah, this game almost feels like a Kaizo ROM hack of Mega Man 3 and 4 at times, especially in the second half. I wouldn't call this an issue, in fact a lot of the stages are way more interesting when they present a real challenge like this, but sometimes it does get a tiny bit ridiculous. You'll see what I mean. I also noticed this game is actually pretty bad with the screen crunch too, with a bunch of enemies jump scaring you before you can realistically react to them. This actually wasn't an issue with Dr. Wily's Revenge, so I think this came from doing a more direct translation of the enemies from the NES games into the Game Boy. A bit more care here in porting over the enemies would have helped out tremendously, because I think it's at a point where the majority of damage I take in this game doesn't feel like it's completely my fault. And actually, wow, the slowdown is crazy as well. I notice it mostly in the stages from 3, but it's present throughout the whole game. Whenever a lot is happening on screen, you get absolutely drowned in lag, and it sucks. In the more difficult platforming sections, the slowdown is just egregious and makes everything feel horrible to play. Mega Man 3 and 4 were able to get away with a lot of difficult level design elements because you're always in full control of your movements. When you take that away though, I think the experience of playing through the game absolutely tanks, and it exacerbates any issues that the stages themselves might have. So, let's see exactly how those stages play out. because I wanted the Shadow Blade as soon as possible, Shadow Man is up first. This is a pretty faithful recreation of the original for the most part, to the point that I honestly don't have much to say about it. The grenade enemies that run at you don't mix particularly well with the small screen, but otherwise the stage is pretty fun and everything I said about the original applies here. However, they did put in one great addition, which is these platforms that explode after 3 seconds when you touch them. I love these things, and they're used in many of the stages for some fun platforming moments. Shadow Man himself is very easy with the charge shot, unlike the original which practically requires the top spin to win the fight. Sparkman, on the other hand, is pretty different from the original. First of all, man is it so slow, at least at the start. The original stage did have its moments of waiting around, like with these electric beams, but is way worse here unfortunately. The slowdown affects the sections where the platforms rise up to the spiky ceiling, and that kind of gameplay is hot garbage when you aren't fully in control. But then it gets a lot better. You have to fall through some spikes with bomb platforms and some interesting configurations, and I really like this addition. The stage is a lot longer than the original, but I feel like most of that runtime is warranted. As you go forward, the enemy placement improves, the stage throws new ideas at you, and I can honestly say that yeah, the stage was pretty good. I still prefer the original, but this one definitely redeemed itself over time. And the biggest improvement is the weapon. The spark shot was absolutely useless in Mega Man 3, but here it's actually pretty useful and acts more like the ice shot from Mega Man 1 and Dr. Wily's Revenge. I haven't really mentioned the weapons in this game before now, but I mean, they're good. I loved how Dr. Wily's Revenge took the original Mega Man 1 weapons and increased their power levels a lot, making me like them about as much as the ones from Mega Man 4, if not even more. These ones are on average about the same as their original versions, which makes sense. They're all pretty useful, but for whatever reason, I didn't find myself using them quite as much as I did in some of the other games. Next, Snake Man is definitely not as good as the original, which, if you remember, was one of my favorite stages in the whole classic series. I do like the new palm tree background, but the level design itself is a bit less inspired. It's quite a bit harder too, with this one E-tank that I swear is a practical joke on the player. I probably spent 5 minutes trying to get it before I just gave up. I do think the ladder section at the end is a cool difference. It makes it feel just a bit distinct from the original, which is nice. Still a good stage, but definitely a bit of a downgrade. Gemini Man was probably the longest stage from the original, and considering this game has had pretty long and difficult stages so far, that actually ends up working really well here. Yeah, this is the only stage in the first half that I think might be better than the original, and it's all because of the improved intro. Rather than using a bunch of really annoying enemies on a boring straight line, there's some real level design and verticality here, which is really refreshing. And the dragonfly enemies are a much better choice than those UFOs in the original. The second half is probably slightly worse, mostly because the slower shooting controls make digging through the eggs a bit less fun. Those sections are longer and actually have some interesting designs though, so it's still a pretty good time. And I noticed the Shadow Blade absolutely shreds through them, which is a lot of fun. I already liked the original stage on the whole, but this one is by far the best of the 4 Mega Man 3 stages in this game. That being said, the Mega Man 3 half of this game is done, and it's good. I definitely prefer the original stages on the whole, but this is a fine enough showing. I think they're about on par with the main stages of Dr. Wily's Revenge, meaning good but nothing too special. So let's see how the Mega Man 4 half compares. But first, we have a middle stage. Yeah, this is actually the first game that had this idea. So many later games in the series would split the stages into 2 groups of 4 with a middle stage between them, so it's really cool to see its origins in a Game Boy game like this. While it's really cool this stage exists at all, there's not much to it. You get a few simple platforming sections, then there's a new and pretty unique fight against this thing, the giant Susie. It's a pretty cool boss too, bouncing around an enclosed hallway making it really tough to dodge. And it also shakes the whole screen when it lands, which is a nice effect. But then the stage is over and you're onto the Mega Man 4 half of the game, where I started with Dustman. And this is easily the hardest main stage I've ever played in a classic series game. No, seriously, I'm not even kidding when I say that this makes the Doc Robot look like the first half of Mega Man 5. You know how I talked about liking fast-paced stages that take around 5 or 6 minutes to beat? Well, guess how long this one took me. I'll give you a second. It took 31 minutes to beat. That's practically the entire runtime of Game Boy 2. Not only is the stage itself really long, but it's packed full of deadly pixel-perfect jumps, off-screen jump scare enemies, and some surprisingly creative level design elements that test possibilities you may have never even considered. Other than the off-screen enemies, because seriously, the shield enemies on the Game Boy are Screen Crunch City, this is my favorite stage in the game. Yeah, I mean it. First of all, this is practically a completely new stage. Outside of the Crusher section and the enemies rising from pits, this is almost unrecognizable as Dustman. The level design is a lot more cramped, with lots of slide passages, low ceilings, and weird platform placements. The Crusher section is really tough, practically forcing you to make life or death decisions in a split second, and having to clear the dust blocks from interesting positions. They also put the checkpoint right before this section, which is perfect since you are practically guaranteed to die a bunch of times here. But don't think you're done yet, because the second half of the stage is even more insane. There's a section where there are a ton of spikes in a pit that's way too wide to jump over, and you aren't even guaranteed to have Rush Jet yet, so what's the solution? You have to place Rush Coil on the spikes to act as a platform. I don't know if it's just me, but that is so creative and I love it. The hardest part though is the last minute or so before the boss. They go insane here with fights against big enemies next to a bunch of pits and instant death spikes, meaning both your combat and platforming skills are tested at the same time. Some of these jumps are actually so tight too, like wow, I died in the second half so many times. Yeah, I love that they didn't hold back at all. This is one of the hardest Mega Man stages I can think of, and even if it's not in the top tier with Snake Man and Ring Man or anything, I really appreciate what they're going for and had a lot of fun here. Next, the revamped Skullman is a slight improvement from the original. I like the new theming with the platforms all looking more like bones rather than fossils. Yes, I do know that fossils are bones, you get the point. Both versions of the stage look great though, it's hard to prefer one over the other visually. I'm still not sure how common of an opinion it is, but I found the original Skullman incredibly boring and just annoying to play through. There's so much walking in a straight line while annoying enemies fall from the ceiling and surprise you from off screen, which is just really not my thing. Unfortunately, much of that carries over to this version, although I do feel like the level design is a bit more interesting. There's some more actual platforming here and somewhat interesting room layouts. But the enemy placement might be even worse than the original, mostly because of the smaller screen. My favorite addition though is this really cool change to the ending, where they replaced the orange sky with a kind of dark, pulsating bone dungeon idea, and it really works for me. This section also cranks up the challenge a bit, which I find pretty fun. Still not an amazing stage, but a solid improvement. But now it's time for my least favorite thing about Game Boy 3. What the heck did they do to Dive Man? First of all, this one loves instant kill spikes so much that it's kind of concerning. I can't recall a single room that doesn't have them literally everywhere. There's falling through spikes, which just doesn't mesh well with the momentum-based air control of the Minakuchi games. There's the classic water level going up and down from the original, which I absolutely loved, but oh, this is such a huge downgrade. Again, practically the only obstacle is spikes, with a few tiny enemies occasionally deciding to show up. And the water physics, god, what happened? When you jump out of the water, it feels like you get jolted downwards or something. It is so unintuitive. Combined with the slowdown, this all just feels so gross to play through. This stage kind of makes me sad, let's just move on. Thankfully, the next one is much better. I didn't like how Drillman originally was just walking through hallways with annoying enemies and annoying rocks falling on your head, with occasional bits of actual level design. Here, the stage is much more interesting and varied to play through. They added a few more elements like the exploding platforms and also the timed spike switching platforms from the Cossack stages. I really like that, and I feel like it's exactly what this stage needed. The falling rocks are still kind of annoying, but they did come up with far more interesting ways to use them than just repeating one idea for a minute straight like they did in the original. They become more of a timing challenge as opposed to the weird way they worked before, where they fall immediately right as you get close, and then in this really annoying pattern afterwards. I like this iteration of the stage, it's just pretty solid. And to wrap up the Mega Man 4 section, this is also good. I think on average these are a bit better than the stages from the original. I love what they did with Dustman, Drillman is a solid improvement, and Skullman is decent. But man, it's a shame what happened to Dive Man, which was one of my favorite stages of Mega Man's 8-bit era. That is easily the biggest sin this game commits. Now lastly, we have the Wily stages. Little did you know that sentence was a lie. We have the Wily stage. Wait, just one? Even Dr. Wily's Revenge had 2. Well, I actually don't mind that this is the only one, because like Dustman and like the first Game Boy game, we have a long and arduous gauntlet to finish off the game. It seriously feels like this stage is never going to end as you're playing through it, and each individual section is also really tough. You start out with a fight against Punk, the Mega Man killer. It's a decent fight, pretty easy once you learn the pattern, but it requires some timing and patience. And then, now that you have his weapon, you go to the main stage. And, well, it doesn't start out great, honestly. There is some god-awful enemy placement here, including a bunch of enemies that hit you the instant you enter a room or respawn, and my least favorite, one enemy that falls from the ceiling during a rush jet section and knocks you off onto a bed of spikes. Come on, that's just mean. I will say there are some cool combat rooms though, including a few interesting ones with shield attackers and ladders. They got pretty creative here, and I do really like it. Luckily, it gets a bit better later on. There are a few really cool ideas, like this room where you have to slide under some spikes before the room gets dark. You get to fight the giant Susie again, which is still a good boss. But the stage just goes on, and a lot of it is copy-pasted content. I'd rather just have a shorter stage if they didn't have any new ideas. Like, I swear some of these rooms show up 3 times with no differences other than the type of enemy in them, which is blatant padding. At least these sections are a bit easier than before, so you likely won't have to restart the entire stage if you're being careful. Then the boss at the end is pretty cool. It looks different from anything you've seen so far. It's also not too difficult, although you might want to save an E-tank or 2 for this part if you don't want to restart the whole stage. But then you beat it and... Wait, it was the Wily machine? That's honestly kind of a cool twist. I thought this was just going to be a boss of the first stage, but it's actually the end of the game. The second phase sees you use Punk's weapon to attack Wily from a distance, which is also pretty easy. A decent final boss in a very bloated stage, which ends Game Boy 3. It's weird. Despite me feeling like there isn't much to say about this game, this video ended up being about the same length as the one on Dr. Wily's Revenge. Although, to be fair, that game did have 6 stages compared to this one's 10. It's tough to synthesize my thoughts on Game Boy 3 into anything profound, partly because it doesn't really stand out to me for any particular reason other than a few stages being really hard. The level design is good on average, with a few that are great and a few that definitely aren't. The first half just feels like Mega Man 3, but not as fun. The second half does feel pretty distinct from Mega Man 4, with a different design mentality that I can appreciate. That being said, I still don't like it that much more than 4 in this section, and it has some of its own problems as well. And then the 2 Wily stages are also fine. It's probably easy to see why this is tough for me. Game Boy 3 definitely falls into the same tier as Dr. Wily's Revenge and Mega Man 4 for me. I think this one is probably a bit better than those 2 on the whole, but not by too much. Something about the simplicity of Revenge just works for me, whereas this one is unfortunately more overshadowed by both Mega Man 3 and 4. Because it doesn't do as much to stand out, I've practically already forgotten about this game by the time I finish it, and that's a bit sad because there really are some great ideas here and some stages are really good. So in the end, I think I'll have to rank this game just above Mega Man 4 and Dr. Wily's Revenge. I feel like when I think about Revenge, I tend to view it more positively than this one, but the more I go over this script and compare them, the more I realize that Game Boy 3 is a solid game that beats out those other 2 for me by a small margin. But it is definitely nowhere near the Mega Man 2 and 3 tier for me. If you've played this game, I'm interested to see where you rank it. But I think that's all I have to say, so it's time to wrap things up. As a quick update, I'm still not completely sure what the next video will be. I'm working on both Game Boy 4 and a video on a game series I haven't yet covered, but have quite a bit to say about. You may have seen the poll in the community tab, so go let me know which one you think it'll be if you haven't already. Metroid is currently in the lead, so we'll see if you were all correct about that soon. And also, I made a Google Doc ranking all the games I've reviewed so far, in case you want to see my opinions at a glance. I actually have a similar list I've been keeping for around 7 years or so, but I'm not planning on making that one public anytime soon, since it needs some cleaning up, and it would also spoil you on all of my riveting video game opinions. So I'll be adding to this new list every time I release a new video or mention a game I don't plan to make a full video review about. You can find it in the video description. I'm sure that won't lead to any controversy in the future, but that's enough for today. Next up is a 50-50 chance of more Mega Man or something new. See you then, and thanks for watching.